Hello and welcome to another episode of the Optimize Show. I am David Mamano, your host. I have a great, incredible, special guest today on the show, Matt Poepsel. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David.
So excited to have you here. All the way from Boston, flew in today.
That's right.
To be on the show. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
Truly appreciate it. Yeah. So you've been at Predictive Index for around 10 years.
10 years, that's right.
Yeah. And
Time flies.
It's been phenomenal. I think when you started there, it probably didn't have all the digital dashboards and features that it has today, right? So
yeah, I was first trained in the Predictive Index tooling back in 2007, and when I had a chance to join the company in 2013, not much had changed.
Yeah.
The family still owned the business. It was still a high potential, but a sleepy little assessment company. There's many of them in the space.
Yeah.
And in 2014, the current owners, Mike Zani and Daniel Muskis, bought the company, and boy, it changed everything. Started to invest millions of dollars in refreshing the science and the software, the tooling, the workshops, expanding the size of our certified partner network, and really it's been amazing ever since.
Yeah. Well, to your point, there are a lot of assessments out there.
Definitely.
Right, that help companies, really help the person in the company find out their strengths, what they're good at, what they should stay away from, right? But I think, what I have learned about the Predictive Index and what it sets it apart is that it really starts with making sure you're hiring the right person, right? We've worked with companies where they were interviewing somebody for a specific role, and after they took the Predictive Index, really found out this person is not right for this role, but wow, we really like this person, right? They do bring some great qualities to the table. In fact, we have another role that would be a good fit for them, right? So, as Jim Collins would say, right person, right seat, right bus, all that stuff, right?
That's right.
And so that is really helpful from the start, the hiring, and now it's gotten so sophisticated where team design.
Yep.
Right, helping people. You don't want three. We have different personality types in the Predictive Index. I'm a maverick, right? And we don't want three mavericks on a team, designing a project, right? Like we want to, have it balanced so that Predictive Index helps you do with that. And then of course engagement, right? Engagement, retention. So it's the full picture in a digital dashboard. I'm so excited about it. You can tell, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But why don't we allow you to just give us a better overview of you being the expert with the benefits and the value of the Predictive Index?
Well, I'm like you, David. I love assessments. I take every assessment I can because I'm always anxious to learn things about myself, about the organization, whatever it might be. One of my absolute favorite things about the Predictive Index, and I hear this a lot, is how it's brief, but it provides such powerful insights. So, I'd put it up pound for pound against any assessment on the market as far as how much time it takes, usually 6 minutes or less, to provide this hugely versatile amount of information about an individual and combined with how they work with other people. So that's the one thing you really want to make sure is when you're choosing an assessment that it's valid, that it's reliable, that it's suitable for whatever it is you're going to use it for. And I think that's what really draws a lot of people to the Predictive Index. To your point, when we start, one of the most important decisions we can make is a hiring decision. We're going to be spending a lot of time with this person. They're going to come in and be a representative of our culture. Hopefully they'll advance it. That's a really high stakes decision, as it's known. So doing that without the data is pretty dangerous. So when you have the data, a lot of our clients over the last several decades have come to us because of primarily a hiring situation. What we come to find out is over the course of having thousands of clients, we started to look and say, how can we help our clients even more have the highest levels of performance and engagement possible? And what we realized is there was more work we had to do across the life cycle, the employee life cycle, to really get all of these insights to the places that they needed to go. So to your point, we had to invent new science when it comes to team tools, strategy types, how these things really help guide more complex machinations inside of organizations, if you will. And all of a sudden, it really opened up an entire new discipline that today we call talent optimization. How do we translate business strategy into business results by really optimizing that people part? And it's been really exciting.
Well, and thank you for that. You bring up a really good point. I mean, I've taken it. And I think it took me less than 5 minutes. And when I got the results, and I got to sit down with Lori Call, who helped me go through, she's a certified expert in there. And I couldn't believe the data. I couldn't believe how it just nailed me.
Right.
I was like, wow, how did you get that data in 5 minutes.
It's easily the most common reaction that we get.
It's blown away, right?
Did you talk to my spouse? Did you talk to my college roommates? How do you know all this?
Yeah.
Because you sit down and you think with 5 or 6 minutes to complete this thing, you're like, how could you possibly have learned anything? But it's based on very sophisticated science that we've known about for quite some time.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable how much you can get even just from that initial readback or that initial review of your results. Now think about starting to layer in complexity. So now we know about you as an individual. Well, how about when we match you up to a job? What about when you have other coworkers? What about a group of you working together? What about trends in the entire organization? The tool allows us to build in layers of this organizational psychology, but translate it right down into very specific action. That's what I love about it the most.
Yeah. And the data, it's been building for 50 plus years, right?
Yeah, since 1955 is when the assessment was first created.
Yeah.
And it's been unchanged in terms of its format. We've constantly worked to improve its psychometric capabilities and qualities. But it's really unchanged from how it was created. And it was created by the founder, Arnold Daniels, who was a bombardier pilot, and had noticed that some bombardiers, some individuals were successful in that role and some weren't. And it led him to want to understand that better. Why do some people succeed in a role and some don't? And found that personality drivers and behavioral needs and traits started to really be predictive of behavior. Mm-hmm. So that's where the term the predictive index came from. If you know something about someone's drives and motivations, then their behavior, all things being equal, becomes predictable.
Yeah. So it stemmed from you're either a fighter pilot or a bomber.
Right.
Now it's like either you are, what do they say, the hunter, the gatherer, and everywhere in between.
Everywhere
right?
in between.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's important to remember, if we fast forward to today, the world of work looks entirely different from what Arnold could have ever predicted. Any of us could have predicted even 5 years ago. Yeah. And so everything's constantly changing. So think about your example where I take the assessment to be hired into a job. Is that job static? No, it is not. The job's changing. Well, how as the manager do I coach and develop you to stay current with all the changes in the environment swirling around us, in the role, in the nature of the team composition around you? If I'm doing that without data and without tools, good luck. But if I've got some help and I've got some coaching and some techniques that are being recommended to me, at least now I have a fighting chance.
Yeah. Well, and you think of, you're totally correct, you think of the world of the 1950s,
right,
which really was a command and control. Mm-hmm. You show up, you punch in, you work, and you go home. And you be grateful you have a job.
Right. 100%.
You want to leave for your son's baseball game during the day, or you're having some mental health issues. Too bad, get back to work.
Yeah, there was a totally different expectation and a totally different climate.
Yeah.
And when you think about it today, when we look at org charts, we still produce them for some reason, they reflect anything but how work actually gets done.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the case, to your point. And when you think about the old classic examples of IBM, Xerox, pick your poison, back in the 50s, that were these big, almost militaristic style in terms of the organizational structure and the command and control, to your point. No way does that reflect what's happening today. We want to push as much agency and autonomy down to the workers and allow them to use collaborative techniques and use technologies to be able to learn things faster and to be more agile and dynamic. Yeah. But again, all that requires a very specific way of humans working together with one another. And that's where, unfortunately, the problems begin to set in as well.
Yeah. And to that point, the predictive index can help organizations find out what is going to motivate people, what is going to engage them and retain them. We were talking before that a person can really today's world make $15 an hour as an Uber driver,
right,
or make $15 an hour working in a hospital with blood and patients and
everything that
complexity,
comes with it. Yeah,
everything. And so it's like, I'll be an Uber driver. I work when I want to work, and I'm in my car, and I listen to my music. So predictive index can help that hospital figure out what do we need to do to make this a place that they're going to choose us over Uber, right?
Well, and I think that comes down to the individual leader as well. When we start to think about what's going to make you accept this job offer to come work for me, that's going to be how I show up as the manager, and can I convince you that I'm going to be able to coach and develop you? If so, that's going to be an asset. You may want to come work here. Also, as things continue to change, am I there for you, and am I there to help continue your development and help you navigate the complexities of the organization? Again, I think that's a really important role that we play. And so when in the aftermath of the pandemic, when we saw the Great Resignation and people started moving around all over the place, and we thought, this will die down, it hasn't died down at all. And the question is why? And so what we come to find is that in Generation Z, for example, the most recent generation to enter the workforce, there's not a penalty, if you will, the way that myself, Gen X, would have had of being a job hopper, being labeled as a job hopper. No, 6 months in, if you misled me in the interview process, or if I just don't like it here, I could go drive Uber, or I could go to a different company without impunity. And so all of a sudden, we're seeing this incredible tension right now between executives that tend to be either boomers or Gen X saying, we need to return to work. Okay, this experiment is over, right? Mm-hmm. And the workforce that's saying, no, we've had a taste of flexibility on autonomy. We don't always necessarily want to come back. Or if we do, you can get me to come back to the office, but you're not going to get 100% of my discretionary effort. Mm-hmm. You start to see that there's these challenges that human resources and executive teams are dealing with, which is simply, how do we get our people to want to work and do these kinds of things? It's not a seller's market exclusively anymore, and I don't think it ever will be.
Yeah. Let's go back to like the 80s and 90s, mm-hmm. and then today. It's Gen Xers, right? Mm-hmm. We were working at least part-time jobs in the late 80s and 90s, right? So we can see the journey. What are some of the main differences that you see from 30 years ago to today?
Yeah, the generational norms are quite different. Gen X, when you think about we're coming in, it was work hard, make some money, be able to afford the things that you want. And we had moved away from the boomer generation a little bit, because every new generation is a little bit of a clash or a reaction against what came before. And so Gen X was really about, if you think about the Reality Bites days, I got the gray whiskers, yeah. Old enough to remember these things. And it was very much about trying to find your way to have that type of work. And at the same time, when millennials came in, all of a sudden millennials said to us, hey, we want to be heard. And we're like, what? Yeah. Why? Yeah. No, we want you to listen to what we have to say. Okay, great. Mm-hmm. And then Gen Z comes in and says, we don't want to just be heard. We want you to change some things around here. And we're like, what? Yeah. When is this going to end, right? And if you think about Generation Alpha, right now, this is the first generation that was born completely in this new millennium of ours, post-2000. Mm. These kids are about 12, 13 years old now. Can you imagine what it's going to be like when they enter the workforce not too long from now? Right. And they've had nothing but access to the world's information and every answer they could possibly want, highest levels of autonomy and agency we've ever seen. Mm-hmm. It's only going to keep evolving. So that means for us as leaders, we have to be able to meet the people's needs of what they're coming to us for, whether it's the format of work, what they expect from their work. Yes, we have to get a job done. That's our responsibility as leaders, but we have to do it with our people, not in spite of them. Work isn't something we do to our people. Like we need to encourage them to find their why within ours, and it's becoming increasingly sophisticated, but essential.
Yeah, you just blew my mind because I didn't think about the 12-year-old. I have a 12-year-old.
There you go, Gen Alpha.
And he has learned so much on YouTube, TikTok, whatever, and it's been good stuff. I mean, like, he's been educated. Mm-hmm. I took him fishing. I've been fishing my whole life. He's teaching me things about fishing because things he's learned. I'm like, oh, I didn't know it was called that. He's very, very knowledgeable on a lot of subjects that I was like, when I was 12, I knew nothing, right? And so it's very different. And even my quote unquote leadership as a father, mm-hmm. and the things he says to me that are quote unquote okay. If I said that to my father, I might be getting the you-know-what, right?
Right, yeah, totally changed. And I think what's interesting is when you think about, I talked to some Gen X and some boomer leaders today that are frustrated because they're constantly getting asked the question, why? We're going to make a big change, we're replacing this computer system. Why? Why are we doing this? And we want to know why. And they're like, I'm in charge, just do what I say, is the reaction that they want. And you say, wait a second, let's put ourselves, as every leader must do, in the situation of our followers. And you've had access to nothing but information. You can Google the answer to anything you want. You've had access to ask your teachers whatever questions you've wanted. You've been in college, all these things. Now you come into an organization where you can't Google the answers anymore, but you still want to know why. Mm-hmm. And instead of rewarding that curiosity and that interest, we're frustrated by it because why? We're too busy. We don't have time for all of this, and we just want to cut to the end game, right? And I think this is where we start to see that everything has changed except for our leadership. And that's where our next opportunity is.
What a great segue.
Oh my gosh.
So Matt has written a book called Expand the Circle, available on Amazon.com and other places, right? But
definitely.
It's an incredible read. I mean, the intro alone gave me goosebumps because you are so passionate about this, right?
It's true.
And you dive deep, and it's a lot of personal discoveries and observations that you've seen in your life that made you, just kind of hit your head against the wall and be like, whoa, this needs to be addressed.
Yes.
Right? And so this really addresses the whole leadership conundrum or opportunity, we'll say.
Definitely.
Of how leaders expand their skills in leadership to I'll say optimize everything going on. And a leader today is often, still dealing with the baby boomer in the workplace, who's more used to that old school command and control, like tell me what to do. I'm going to come in at 8, I'm going to leave at 5, no problem. I'm not going to ask too many questions. I'll get the job done, darn it, To the Gen Z, who you just said is, why, okay, but I want to leave at 2 o'clock, but I want to work till 10 p.m., oh, okay, I guess we're judging on results and not hours with you, right? And everywhere in between, Gen Xers,
definitely,
right? Yeah, and millennials, et cetera. So this book, Expand the Circle, I'm going to give you another prop, is really teaching leaders to how to really manage that whole situation, right?
Yeah, I would say it's a new approach for sure, and one that I hit on out of necessity. So I started off my first adult real job was in the U.S. Marine Corps. So having a military background, I got to be exposed to leadership, the importance of it, the development of it, the professionalism of it at a very early and impressionable age, which I thought was fabulous. Going to the civilian world and realized that leadership isn't exactly taught the same way in the civilian world in all organizations the way it was in the military. So I just continued my own studies, and I studied leadership at the PhD level, and I got the chance to rise in the ranks of various companies when I was coming up as a leader as well. And I had the chance to take my dream job at the Predictive Index. And everything was going great, right up until the pandemic. And man, I tell you that the wheels came off for me like they did for so many of us. And all of a sudden, you're left asking this question about what role does work really play in my life? And that is not the kind of question that we hit on in the Marine Corps. You might be surprised to understand. And it certainly didn't come up in executive education programs at Harvard.
Right,
and so what happens now is you're left with this very human question. And I thought, after everything I've done to try to study and practice, and I've had some success, I'm not immune to this, and I got to fight my way out of it. And so for me, when I was going through this challenging time, I don't know why, David. I scheduled my midlife crisis right in the middle of a global pandemic. I don't recommend it, but I think a lot of people now are still showing those same signs. I like to say that Gen Z right now is experiencing a quarter-life crisis because these deep existential questions are in the back of our mind as we're driving to work. Like, why am I doing this? Like, where's the joy in my life? What's my purpose and my meaning here? Whatever it might be. So when I was confronted with these questions, I started to resume a long-forgotten meditation practice of mine. And what I hit upon was 2 things. One is I absolutely suck at meditation because I only think about work. But the other part, though, is that it gave me an answer in the form of saying we don't have to, for example, live our lives on the weekend and ask those existential questions, for example, when we have time to think about them conveniently. Mm-hmm. That our work and our lives are more infused and integrated now than ever, and that's actually a good thing. Mm-hmm. So what I drew inspiration from was a meditation practice where you begin to think and wish wellness for yourself, for example, and then you expand that circle of compassion and wisdom, if you can, to maybe your close family, your spouse, your kids, whatever it might be. Can you go a little further and go out to your coworkers? Can you expand even further to strangers and on out into the entire universe as the practice goes? And I thought, man, this is exactly how I have approached my leadership development. I had to learn to lead myself before I could lead others, lead a team, lead at the organization level, and finally spill that leadership as best I can out into the world. So that became the framework for the book. And so when I say expand the circle in my case of leadership, it's really drawn from an ancient Eastern wisdom practices that I think are more necessary in our modern world of work, ironically, than ever.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You talk about that in your book a lot too. So
yeah, definitely.
You talk about Arianna Huffington was working 18 hours a day building her company and literally basically fainted from exhaustion.
Yes.
Banged her head on the way down, woke up bleeding, and that was her wake-up call.
Totally a wake-up call. And you think about the highest levels of success, when you've had the chances I have to talk to many seasoned and successful executives, sometimes what they remember the most at the end of sort of their career arc and journey is not the accolades, it's not the wealth, it's the impact, it's the relationships, it's the people, right? Yeah. Or those who are not quite there yet have had some level of success and say, I'm supposed to be happy, right? But I'm not. Like, isn't there more to this? And so we find that people can be very successful by the external definition that the world would project onto us, but inside be anything but.
Empty. Right?
And so all of a sudden you're like, time out, we're doing this wrong. And it's a fallacy to believe that we have to either have sort of contemplative and inner sort of peace, for example, versus hard business results. What I love most about the framework in the book is that it lent itself to psychological study, and I cite more than 100 studies that prove the efficacy, higher levels of profit, higher levels of creativity, of innovation, productivity, all these hard measures, they all go up too when we bring in things like empathy, like cohesiveness, trust, psychological safety, these things that are born of very human traits and necessities. They actually produce very real business results if we allow them to.
That's fantastic. Well, on the Optimize show, we often say the 3 Ps of business. First, it's get the people right, optimize their performance, and it's going to lead to profits.
Huge.
Based on what you're saying, I want to add another P. You can do it along the way with peace.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
You don't have to like.
Yeah, and let's not leave that bit out, because exactly what you're saying before about like, hey, I want to reach for the brass ring, but I also want to take care of myself. Right. So you see that especially now with millennial and Gen Z populations again, but I would say it's true across all generational cohorts. Prioritizing personal wellness and self-care should never be seen as a selfish act. Of course we're going to get the performance. Of course we have every right to make sure that people are doing their jobs, but it doesn't have to come at the cost of their wellness. Yeah. And I think in too many organizations across history, it certainly has. Yeah. So now all of a sudden teaching the individuals, teaching the managers and their HR partners and executives that we can have both if we artfully do it the right way. And some of that requires, again, aligning the individual's why and their meaning and all these things they're looking for in the context of the broader organizational mission. So I love that you've added a piece to it. I love it, a 4th P.
We're going to add
Let's
a piece.
do it.
Well, you may be familiar with, unfortunately he's passed away, but Jim Rohn, who used to be a writer and a speaker.
Definitely.
He called himself a business philosopher.
Yep.
And he used to say, wherever you are, be there. And what he meant by that is if you're at work, be at work. Don't let the distractions of home get into work. But when you're at home, be at home. Don't let work come home. And when you're on vacation, be on vacation, right? Cut yourself off, be on vacation. Yeah. Now, he passed away before, we had smartphones, right? And all this interconnectivity.
But I would argue that it's more important than ever. And so when I talk about it in my own enlightened leadership equation, what I say we have to drive up is mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. And what you're talking about is mindfulness. Be present, be fully, your attention focused on whatever it is. And it is harder than ever, to your point. Like when you work from home, if you're a young person working from your apartment, your office and your bedroom may be exactly the same thing, right? It's hard to have that sort of delineation, if you will. But mentally, finding and being truly present and mindful, that is more important than ever, even as difficult as it is to do. So I'd rather see us in our organizations not just teach generative AI and operational theory, and these things are important, we need to do them, but when are we teaching mindfulness? And when are we teaching and doing to reward people and promote people based on things like compassion and the more human qualities? That's still more rare.
It's more and more important, absolutely.
Yeah, but important, absolutely.
No, I know a CEO of a company that when his team will go on their vacations, he insists that they disconnect from their phone and their computer, their email, and anything how work can contact them, so that they can actually recharge, refresh.
It's wise. Vacation. It's smart because when people come back, then they come back not only more energized, better able to perform, but what about the loyalty?
They appreciate
What
it.
about the appreciation? Yeah. Exactly. And that's going to come back to you. So I understand that it can be a little scary if you haven't done it before at your company. Yeah. But I think if you've hired the right people, if you've reinforced it the right way, they're clear about what job performance looks like, and they feel supported, it's going to come back to you. It is. Yeah. I'll give you one other quick example, because where I might have written a new book about this topic, I think this notion towards taking care of people and being humanistic has really been with us for a long time. And I'll go back to Southwest Airlines. Their ticker symbol is love. LUV. And when you put the heart on the side of the plane and they really took care of their employees with a theory that it's going to translate to the way they take care of customers, they were tremendously successful by treating people like people within the context of work. And you want to talk about, people and performance and profit. I mean, for a time there, they were really top of the litter, pick of the litter there, right?
For a while there, 20 plus years, they were the only profitable airplane company, like airline, in a row for like 20 plus years, right? So,
and too many times you see organizations saying, oh, we're one of the best places to work. But in reality, the employees are like, yeah, right. No, it doesn't really feel that way. But for the companies that absolutely do get it right, that are mission driven, that take care of their people first, all of a sudden they actually garner this competitive advantage. And so now we're starting to see the rise of conscious capitalism and stakeholder capitalism, realizing that profits alone aren't enough. Yeah. How are we contributing to a better planet? How are we contributing back to society? This isn't just nice to have. This is what the employees of tomorrow are looking for in terms of good actors who they want to actually be employed by. Otherwise, to your earlier point, I'll just go drive for Uber or Instacart or Amazon and have the flexibility that I'd want if you're not going to give me what my deeply human needs are telling me that I should be getting.
Right, yeah. Yeah, a lot of companies will have the veneer of a great place to work, great core values, but you get in there and you're like,
yeah, are we living our values?
Behind the curtain, I don't know if it's happening.
100%. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, either you're going to have that sort of toxicity or people are going to leave, right? Yeah. That's what's going to happen. So I'm not saying that it's simple but not easy, right? Mm-hmm. And I think Jim Rohn said something else wonderful, which was, you take care of you for me and I'll take care of me for you. Yeah. When we all have that sort of mentality and we all help one another achieve that ideal, again, always within the context of the business, performance is non-negotiable. Yeah. But it's not the end-all be-all. It's not the limit of what we're capable of in our organizations and in our leadership. So we have to go further and still take care of the people part as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So locally, I'm sure you've heard of Wegmans.
Yes, of course.
Which really up until recently has really been only in this area. The past 10 years they've expanded a little bit to your neck of the woods in New England and a little bit near, I think, Maryland, Virginia area. But they consistently have been in the Fortune Best Places to Work, like number 1, 2, 3, and they're only around here for the most part. And then so I was like, wow, I'm so proud of Wegmans, And then my older son, got a part-time job there during high school, and I was like, well, this is a test, because he'll tell me what it's really like. And to my great happiness, he loved it. They treated him like gold. They have contests to, where he won a big screen TV for one of the contests that he won, Wow. And they give him all these clothes, and they treat him like gold, free food, and so it was nice to know it was true.
That's right. That's right.
Now recently here in Rochester, one of their competitors nationally, Whole Foods, came to town, and not too far down the street from one of their main stores, and they fought it. They did whatever they could to not let them come to town. And I thought to myself, why fight it? If you really are living, your core values and you're living this best place to work, you got nothing to worry about, right? And because they're not going to figure out your secret sauce. Everybody, apparently, HP, Dell, et cetera, can figure out, they can look inside an Apple computer and see what they do. But if if you love Apple, you're not switching,
Right.
and so there's more to just the mechanics of it, right?
It's hard to replicate. It's hard to knock off that type of a people first approach, I would say.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, in the book I cited 2 other books that I really enjoyed. One was from the former CEO of Best Buy, Hubert Joly, and he wrote a book called The Heart of Business. So now business has a heart. That's interesting. Yeah. And another one was from the editor-in-chief at Fortune magazine, and it was called In Search for the Soul of Business. So now we're looking for the business's soul. Yeah. So I think there's this natural tendency towards the people-centric aspects, the more existential aspects as being equally important to performance. Again, not overly. We don't want to have people having a great time, but the performance is suffering. We can't have that. Yep. But it should be seen as equals. It shouldn't be seen as nice to have or something we talk about but don't do. We can't have those things and expect to be competitive in the long run.
Yeah, no, I love when we talk about business and we use the words, soul and heart. Right. And I just learned something at a seminar a couple years ago that I loved. So, good companies have core values.
Definitely.
And they live them, right? And this guy that was good at the presentation, he goes, does anybody know where the word core came from? And there were some answers that were kind of obvious, like, oh, the core, But he's like, Who knows the Spanish word for heart, right?
Oh.
Do you know it?
Corazon.
Right. Who knows, and he said, who knows the French word for heart?
Good.
You're good. Huh? Who knows the Italian, I'm going to test you,
yeah,
who knows the Italian word for heart?
I'll let you fill in that
It's
one.
core.
Oh, okay, core.
So all those three words stem from the Latin word of core, right? They all have some version of core, the corazon, core.
Makes good sense.
Core values from the heart.
From the heart.
I love that.
So central, yeah.
Yeah. And so great companies that have great core values and live them, they are leading from the heart.
And in the Eastern philosophy, they don't believe that the mind exists in the brain. That's a Western thing to associate those two together. They believe the mind really stems from the heart, right? Yeah. And so it's an interesting to see the heart playing such a central role. And I think we want heartfelt businesses and we want heartfelt leaders and these things, but it can be scary. I get it. I don't necessarily allow it to sort of end there, but I do think that I understand it can be scary to say, well, wait a second, if I give people too much flexibility, are they going to do the work? Are they going to take advantage of me? And I understand that reaction, but that type of fear-based approach is never going to get us truly the performance and the sustainable access to success that we want. And it's certainly not going to get us the loyalty that we need.
Yeah. Fantastic. So your book, I want people to buy this book. I want leaders to buy this book.
There we go.
But, and so an overview of what they're going to learn is, I'll say the 5 L's, So lead yourself, right, by boosting awareness and confidence. Lead others by making critical connections and building trust. Lead your team by uniting a group in the pursuit of a collective goal. Lead your organization by implementing people-centric practices. And lead the world, so this is where you're talking about making a difference beyond the organization, by going beyond the boundaries of your organization.
Yeah, that's that inside-out framework for sure. As leaders, we need to act from the inside out and make sure we start with leading ourselves before expanding that circle of leadership all the way out, just as far as we can go.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So in your book too, we were talking before, and I love this. One of the most popular topics to discuss are the killer bees.
Ah, yes.
And not the killer bees you're thinking about, but tell us about your killer bees.
Yeah, I started to try to think about become a little more specific about the existential needs that we experience. And what I hit on was the fact that we're all looking to varying degrees for being, belonging, something bigger than myself. Who am I really? So many people in organizations can't answer that question with any sort of definitive answer. And so as a leader, how can I help you understand what your strengths are and how you're expressing those through your work? Belonging, where do I fit in? How do I help enhance social ties, perhaps even at distance if we're at a remote situation or whatever it might be? How do we create those strong social bonds and make sure people feel that they're connected to one another? And then something bigger than myself, how does the work that I'm doing really make a difference? How does it have an impact? How does it matter? Something beyond my own limited self-interest. And I think that the reason I call these 3 Bs the 3 killer bees is because if we don't meet those needs, it kills our performance, our productivity, our intent to stay, our loyalty. Only bad things happen. So if you're a leader and you're saying, do I really know how my individuals on my team, for example, would be able to answer those questions? Then you've got work to do if you can't answer that. But when you help someone navigate and answer those questions for themselves on your watch, so to speak, then the amount of goodwill and loyalty and performance, everything dramatically gets better. So remember that you're employing human beings, which means being human at work. So how do we help them be human at work within the context of that work? That is the real art of leadership.
Yeah, the art of leadership, exactly. And it is called human resources. I think people forget that, right?
Definitely, yeah. But I think that brings up an interesting point, which is that when we teach our executives and we teach our leaders today, we obsess over the technology capabilities, the operations, the processes, the efficiency, the machinery, if you will, of business, which I understand. But remember that no one goes from business strategy to business results without passing through the people part. That is all the difference. And I don't think we do an even job in my experience of teaching people the people aspects, teaching our leaders, that is, the people aspects of the role as opposed to the technical bits. Sometimes it's either seen as too variable or too squishy or too soft or too woo-woo or whatever you want to call it. Not true. It's just not true. The most effective leaders can do both. They can understand the strategy and the machinery of business, but they also understand how to meet people's very human needs within the context of all of that.
And a lot of it, sometimes I think leaders try to complicate it, right? Sometimes it's just so simple.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, leading by example.
Leading by example.
You know, there's a piece of trash on the floor and you're the CO and you pick it up.
Well, and I'll tell you, in the book where I start off, as I talk, for example, with leading others, leading one other person, it starts with empathy.
Right.
Do I even understand the experience that you're having? If I can't say that with 100% clarity, why don't I ask? And just shut up and actively listen.
Yeah.
Like, take an active interest in the other person's experience. They just might surprise you.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of leaders, they're like, I don't know how to do these things. And so in the book, what I included were exercises associated with each of those layers that you laid out, so that we don't have to play guessing games. We have right at our fingertips some things we can try to make micro improvements towards a more enlightened form of leadership.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, and you know, I remember I was running a company years ago, and you know, I was probably had adopted more of like some old school leaders where I had to have the answers. You know, I had to show people that I knew everything. Otherwise, I was weak, right? And then I started taking some some coaching and some training about more modern day leadership, and it's about not having all the answers, or about asking questions back, right? And then this one guy I was working with, he blew me away with what I thought was the best leadership question ever. So I was having a meeting with one of my reports. And usually I would, ask her like, well, how are the things going that I told you to work on? And here's my thoughts, and But instead, I asked her one question: how can I support you in what you're working on? And then I shut up.
Right.
I tried so hard not to talk. Right. And I just,
it's hard to
just let her tell me how I can help her, how I can support her as a leader. Right. You call it servant leadership, whatever, bottom up leadership, whatever you want to call it, but. That blew her away, but then she got used to it. So she would come to those meetings now, knowing that I wasn't going to tell her what to do or give her feedback, that I was there to serve her and how can I support her. And it made a huge difference.
Huge difference. Little things can make a huge difference. You're saying to this person, you matter to me. I'm here, we're connected because I'm here to try to support you in that way.
Yeah.
If I find that maybe there's somebody else on the team who can help solve this problem for us, maybe I can create a connection with one of your peers as well that maybe didn't exist before. There's so many good things that come from that. And it's unfortunately still very rare. Yeah.
No, and then I remember another great question was, people would come to me with big problems, and I thought I would have to have the answer, and I learned to say like, I don't know, geez, that is quite the conundrum. Like, what do you think?
Right.
Like, how do you think you're going to handle it? Just. Oh, well, they have to figure it out a little bit, right?
And some leaders feel like, well, if I don't have all the answers, then I'm not leading.
Right.
So, no. That means you're not managing, perhaps. But if you're developing those around you, what leaders should be doing, then you shouldn't, even if you know the answer, sometimes it's good to ask the question and to create the space for them to step into their version of leadership. Because, as leaders, I've always been taught our job is to make ourselves obsolete by developing our people to be at least as close as they can be to where we are. And that's not going to happen if you just blurt out the answers and the orders all day long. If you take a more human approach and you let others step into their leadership opportunity, then everybody wins. That's how that works.
John Maxwell, the guru of leadership. He says, great leaders create more leaders.
There you go. I think I agree 100%. I think it's a wonderful mindset to have. But again, it comes back to something that showed up time and again in my research, which is fear. A lot of leaders have fear that if they give some of that stage and they give some of that power of decision making or the decision about what needs to happen, then it somehow makes them less. But I think that it's exactly the opposite is true. And I had a similar experience to you in the sense that the more I've made myself vulnerable, I thought people would think less of me. Exactly the opposite. It actually drew them in to make them more close to me.
More approachable.
Because they realize that you're human and you become more relatable, and it's just the right thing to do. So when you start to be willing to fight that natural fear, to make it a facade like, oh no, I've got everything in control over here. Someday you walk in, you say, team, I'm not doing so great today. I had a rough night last night. Something was on my mind. Not necessarily going to go into it in detail, but I just want you to know that I could use some help today. If your leader says that, then you want to pitch in to help them.
Right.
But if they try to pretend like they've got everything under control and they try not to show any sort of chinks in their armor at all, it's phony. It's like they can sniff through that right away. And that's not somebody you want to follow, because then you're like, what else are you hiding?
Right, exactly. So tie it all together for us as far as the predictive index and what we're learning in your book? How does it all intertwine?
Yeah, what I find is that not only did my experiences in writing the book were informed by a lot of what I saw through predictive index experiences, for example, and my own personal experience working there for as long as I had at the time and continue to do so. I continue learning about this subject through the work of the predictive index. What I also find, though, is like when I say lead yourself, well, if you have access to the predictive index tools, you actually have a very tangible, practical way of doing that. In our world, it's called a personal development chart. It tells you your strengths, it tells you caution areas, and gives you self-coaching tips. Well, what about leading another person? Well, we have a relationship guide. Two peers can learn about what's positive and what are potential areas of working together on their relationship. That creates trust, that creates a level of fairness, that creates a level of psychological safety among two people. Or a manager strategy guide. And in the case of leading your team, we have an entire team dynamic suite that's all about the natural team dynamic that unfolds. So the way I would say it is that the book lays out a conceptual framework that's next level in the sense that it brings in human elements into the leadership domain in a way that I haven't seen before. I actually believe it's the next era of leadership for us. But the Predictive Index toolset comes along and gives us a very practical, tangible, scientific, data-backed way of progressing towards some of these ideals in a very nice and tidy way.
Last but not least, so, I think a lot of the things we're experiencing today were coming anyway.
Yes.
It's just the pandemic kind of like expedited the process of us getting to the Jetsons way of work, right?
Right.
Gen X will remember the Jetsons,
Definitely.
right? And it's funny, right? They were meeting on a screen. They were talking to things. I mean, it's here, right?
It's here, in many ways.
People like, working out from home, working from home, right? And so, based on your experience and expertise, give us your thoughts about the future of work.
Yeah, it starts off not great in the sense that I think things are going to get worse.
How so?
But they will get better. I think that our obsession with technology to solve all of our problems and the nature of process and our need for instant gratification is almost insatiable at this point. But unfortunately, I think that it leads to people to realize that there's more to life than that. You can't use technology to solve all of your problems. Eventually, just being human, and the human condition is frail, inevitably at some point you will be faced with life's big questions and big challenges. And so I do believe that what we're seeing in sort of the latest generations, I should say, to enter the workplace is more of a demand for things like conversations about mental wellness and fairness and inclusivity. I think there is this trend toward incorporating what have historically been either wellness topics, Eastern topics, the nature of mindfulness and yoga and all these things. But I think it's being overpowered today by the technology advancement. But I think inevitably where we're going to end up is something that reflects a true integration of the two. My favorite place will be the intersection of East and West, the intersection of technology and process along with humanistic and people-centric practice. I think that's the sweet spot that we need to find sooner rather than later. And I think that with the right mindset, the right frameworks and tools, I think we can.
How does AI fit in?
Yeah, AI is really a time saver in many ways, but it's not something that can replace true human connection. So I think that what happens is if AI can take some of the more menial aspects of management, I'll call it away, it creates more space for leadership. But it'll be up to the leader to determine to use that newfound time in a way to actually lean into something that only leaders can do, which is that very human aspect of the practice. So I think that AI has the promise to take away a lot of the time-consuming parts of management, but it'll be up to us, and our true leadership opportunity will be to make the decision to use the extra space and capacity, not to just take on more and more work, which is kind of what happens, but instead to actually use that opportunity to get closer to our people and really meet their needs. Leadership, it's not about you, it's about the mission, and it's about them. So how do we use AI to be able to pour more energy and more of our precious time into those things and away from our own self-interest? That I'm very interested in.
And that's why you're the godfather of talent optimization.
There you go.
Matt, this has been a true pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show. We were traveling all the way from Boston. Hope it was worth your while. I know it was worth ours, for sure.
Absolutely, David. I'm so thrilled that you had me on. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And if people want to reach out to you,
yes,
what's the best way to do that?
I would love it. I'm very active on LinkedIn. It's the best place to get a hold of me. If you want to learn about myself, my work, the book, mattpoepsel.com is the URL for that. But definitely, if you want to have a conversation, I would welcome that opportunity. LinkedIn's the best place to find me.
And that's where we were connected by
Absolutely. See, there you go.
Len Salvatore, yeah. So Excellent. Well, thank you, and you're welcome back to the show anytime. Maybe we do a yearly show. We just kind of
I like that.
document how things are evolving, right?
Let's do it.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, David.
Matt. Take care. And thank you, everybody, for watching another great episode of the Optimize Show. I'm Dave and Matt, your host. Truly appreciate you. Follow us on YouTube, subscribe, like, share. We're trying to make some great progress, some great movement, in the world of talent optimization. And you can help by spreading this word and getting more and more people watching the show. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and make sure to stay awesome.